I've been regaling you with tales of my sexual escapades in childhood, few as they were, growing up in a society that basically prohibited childhood sexuality, as compared to Polynesia, where the children, not only in traditional Polynesia, the children not only were allowed to play together freely as much as they wanted, they were not allowed to wear clothes when they were young. The girls didn't start wearing clothes until they were about 6. They put on a little grass skirt at about the age of 6. And the young men didn't have to put on a loincloth, or actually it was a coconut shell penis sheath, not a sheath, but a pouch. And they didn't have to do that until after they got not circumcised, but they had their foreskin, the foreskin of the penis slit on the top, just on the top. They didn't remove the foreskin because they wanted to keep it in place to protect the sensitive head of the penis. For instance, when men were in the water, in and out of the water, diving or swimming or fishing or whatever, they would take off their penis pouch, which was made of woven palm strands of palm leaf. They would take it off when they were in the water, and in order to protect the head of their penis, they wanted to be able to have the foreskin wrapped around the tip of the penis, but they had a hole drilled in the two sides of the two flaps. It was cut along the very top, just one straight line along the top of the foreskin, and then it was tied together with a little thong to protect the tip of the penis. And they would untie it, if they were going to have sex, or they would untie it in order to wash the penis, because that's why they slit the top of the foreskin, was to be able to roll the foreskin out of the way and clean the tip of the penis and get everything out of the crevices there. So for hygienic reasons, guys had their foreskins slit on the top. They put a smooth coconut husk between the tip of the penis itself underneath the foreskin. They slid it in there so that the tip of the penis was protected by the coconut shell, which had been smoothed off and carefully polished and was nice and soft. Or, it was hard. It would protect the penis, but it wouldn't cut the penis or anything like that. So it was between the head of the penis and the foreskin. The foreskin was on top of it. And then they took the closest thing they had to a razor blade, which was a shark's tooth. And a shark's tooth really sharp. So they just took and went like that quickly down the top of the foreskin. And then the boy bathed that in the ocean and made sure to keep it separated, didn't let it grow back together again until it was healed up. And then that was the time when he would begin to have sex with the older woman whom his family had designated to be his sex tutor, and make sure that he was proficient in intercourse, so that he could then, as a teenager, go out and date the girls around in the village around and develop relationships with them and have sex with them and be able to hold up the family's reputation that the men of the family were good sexual partners because they had been well trained by an older female relative like an aunt or a cousin or a cousin's wife or an uncle's wife or something like that. So that was their sexual education. Complete nudity up to the age of 6 for girls and up to 12 for boys, and then practical sexual experience after that, before eventually deciding, I'd like to pair up with this person for, permanently and form a family with this person. And they didn't have a big wedding in a chapel with a choir singing on either side and everybody all dressed up fancy. one or the other of them moved into the other's house. You know, the man moved into the woman's house, or the woman moved into the man's house, or maybe the man was able to get a hut that the two of them could move into. But basically, they just started living together. That was marriage in Polynesia. And divorce was exactly the same. When they decided they didn't want to stay in any longer, one or the other of them would just pack up their personal belongings, which weren't very much, and take them, you know, all the way across the village to like a couple of 100 yards away, back to their parents' house, and stay with them for a while until they formed a new alliance with somebody. Marriage was not, you know, a big deal. It wasn't blessed by the gods, because the Polynesians didn't believe the gods cared very much about what human beings did sexually. And so it was a very simple thing, and a totally different environment from ours, and one that was appropriate to a little community living on a little tiny island, you know, out in the middle of the ocean, where there were no sexually transmitted diseases. And it didn't matter if a girl got pregnant. There was always a family that was looking for a baby, and you could give the baby to that family, and you could watch the baby grow up and play with the baby. You didn't have to abandon the baby just because you didn't decide to get married and raise the child as your own. You could give the baby off to anybody who wanted a child, and Polynesian families were always looking for a new child. So it was a totally different approach to sexuality. So as I've recounted to you my own personal experience, that, you know, first I was in the bathtub with my mommy when I was about 3.5, and I thought this was really fun, had a good time. I got turned on and decided to show her my penis because she was showing me her breasts, and found out at that point that that was an end to bathing with mommy, and so showing one's penis to someone else was not a socially acceptable thing to do. And, you know, unfortunately, I'm a good learner, so I learned that lesson pretty early, but it didn't stop me from wanting to be an exhibitionist later on. I wanted to explore women's bodies, girls' bodies. I wanted to see their body and didn't get the chance to, because the mothers would come in and interrupt us and put a stop to that. So instead of seeing naked little girls around me all the time, along with naked boys, the way that a Polynesian child would, you know, I saw nothing but clothed bodies. So a naked body was something, you know, very special, and was a particularly arousing stimulus to my emotional brain. The sexiness recognition centers of my emotional brain were starving for the sight of a naked woman. But they were very, you know, and this was, see, I was growing up in the late 1940s, the early 1950s, and magazines and movies and ordinary daily dress, you know, was pretty conservative in those days. So the first really salient, emotionally standing out experience I had of female nudity was first my mom in the bathtub, and then a few years later, and I was 5 or 6, and this was, you know, I'd had a little bit of attempt to, you know, look at a girl's body one time, but didn't get the opportunity to do that. So the next thing I see, my father liked to take home movies. And so he had an 8mm movie camera with colored film in it. And he and my mother had been down on vacation in Mexico, about a year before I was born. So that would have been 6 or 7 years earlier, you know, when she was like 25, let's say 25, 26, no, because I was born when she was 24. So she'd have been like 22. And he took her on to Mexico. But I didn't really understand that the home movies we were watching were from that Mexico trip. I didn't know where they were from. I was 5, 6. I didn't know what was going on. What there was a party, in my parents' house. There was a living room, and I didn't realize it at the time, but my father had apparently gotten some money from this stock that he owned in some stores in Texas that our grandfathers and great-grandfather had built up this store. So anyway, my father had gotten some money. And so we moved from Inglewood in South Los Angeles, a very modest, tract home area, up to Westwood, about a block from UCLA, a block east of UCLA. And this is to the west side of Hollywood and the Sunset Strip and so forth. This is quite a bit over to the west. Later on, about a mile away or so, Hugh Hefner bought a house that he turned into the Playboy Mansion. We weren't living in anything like that, but it was a big house. It was a big 2-story, 3-story house. And anyway, it was impressive enough to lease to a film star, John Kerr, who starred in South Pacific. While we were going to be gone for a year and a half, he leased the house from my parents. So my dad had bought this house to impress a certain group of people. And these were the Hollywood Christians of the late 1940s, early 1950s. Roy Rogers and Dale Evans were part of that crew. Bob Nolan, who sang with Roy Rogers and the Sons of the Pioneer, he was friends with my dad somehow, and they got me an autographed picture of Roy and Dale, the cowboy stars of the day. And so there was this show business Hollywood group that my dad was wanting to get into as a young minister, now in his 30s. He was wanting to break into this prestigious Hollywood group and kind of impress this group of Hollywood Christians. So he had them over to our house one evening for a party, a dinner party, a big living room, and with a piano and all this stuff. And as the evening wore on, finally my dad set up a screen and started to show them home movies. And one scene in that home movie really stood out for me, and I'm sure for everybody else. The star of the scene is my mother. And she's like, at the time, 22, 23 years old, has sort of strawberry blonde hair and excellent good looks. And she is in this pool of water, and she's not wearing anything. The water comes up to here, but she's not wearing anything. She's swimming naked in this pool of water, but the surface of the water was completely covered with white gardenia flowers. And behind the pool, there were some bushes and stuff, and it looked like she was, swimming in a pool in the Garden of Eden. She was out skinny dipping in the Garden of Eden with these flowers all over the surface of the water, and her body naked, showing up here, not showing her breasts, but enough to show that she wasn't wearing anything. And I thought that was, of course, really sexy. This must have evoked memories of being in the bathtub with her a few years earlier, 2 or 3 years earlier. And so now here's these movies of her, swimming naked out in this pond. And I thought this was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. I thought this was absolutely wonderful. Wow, this is great. But I didn't know anything more about it than that. Now, years later, I find out that they were in a hotel in Cuernavaca, Mexico. It's a ritzy place. Cuernavaca was where all the richest people in Mexico and international people and movie stars would go and stay. Cuernavaca was where Timothy Leary was staying when he first ate psilocybin mushrooms back around 1960. But Cuernavaca, so they had this, they catered to the tourists, it was a luxury place. And so, my dad not having a sex relationship with my mom, Nevertheless, he was an avid photographer, and he took pictures of her as they went around Mexico. There are pictures of her in her swimsuit at Acapulco and all this stuff. So he enjoyed having this trophy wife because she was so beautiful, and enjoyed showing her off to other people and impressing other people with how beautiful his wife was and what a beautiful singing voice she had. Because that was her other talent. She could play the piano and a beautiful singing voice, soprano. So they were at this hotel in Cuernavaca, and the hotel had a swimming pool. And one of the things they would do for the tourists, if the tourists were willing to pay for it, was the tourists would buy some baskets full of gardenias or whatever these flowers were, and the folks who had grown them and brought them to the hotel, would place them in the water so that the whole pool was covered with these flowers, and someone could go swimming in the pool and be photographed there if they wanted to, which is what my mom did. And of course, what I didn't realize was they must have had a swimsuit shop in the hotel, where they sold the latest models of his swimsuits. And she had bought a strapless swimsuit. She'd bought one that just came up to there. And so it was a one-piece strapless swimsuit. And that was quite daring for those days to have no strap over the top at all. But anyway, that's what she was actually wearing under the water, but nobody could see that, in the movie. So it looked like she wasn't wearing anything. So here's my dad, a minister, trying to impress these Hollywood Christians, showing them sort of soft porn starring my mom, And anyway, I don't know what effect it had on the rest of the Hollywood Christians, but it certainly was an arousing stimulus to my emotional brain. And I felt that sensation of being sexually aroused, even though I don't recall actually getting an erection. But nevertheless, I had the feeling of, boy, that is a really sexy scene. And that made an indelible impression on my emotional brain. So a year or so later, we go to the movies. And we saw some movie about Navy waves, okay? The movie was supposedly set. It's now long enough after World War II that it's okay to have entertaining movies about the World War II period. And I'm not sure if this was an Esther Williams movie or not, but at one point, but there was swimming involved in a swimming pool. And at one point, all the Navy waves changed out of their Navy outfits into swimsuits, one-piece swimsuits, and they were swimming underwater. And it was the first underwater film shot that I'd ever seen. It was probably one of the first ones that was done. And so they had the camera set up to see the whole pool underwater, and there was a series of hula hoops suspended in the water. Little loops, that were big enough, the regular size of a hula hoop, and round and an inch or two in diameter. And so the Navy waves were swimming through the hula hoops underwater from one side to the other, one after another of them, all of them in their one-piece swimming suits, as they went through these hula hoops. And I've always associated with water, being in water, with being sexy. And here, these women, they weren't naked, but they were wearing one-piece swimsuits, and they were swimming through hula hoops. And somehow, this was really sexy to me. My emotional brain found that really another arousing sexual stimulus. So let's say there had been 3 of them. Being in the bathtub with mommy, seeing mommy starring in, the Eden-esque swimming naked, I thought, in the water. See, it didn't matter to my emotional brain that she was wearing a swimsuit in those movies, because my emotional brain didn't know she was wearing a swimsuit. I believed she was naked below the waterline. So my emotional brain believed that mommy was swimming in the water, naked, with all these flowers around her on the surface and sort of bougainvillea bushes in the background or something really exotic. It looked like a beautiful tropical paradise. So that was the second one. And then the third was this movie with the nurses swimming through hula hoops underwater. And I'm sure Freud would have something to say about the long cylindrical body of a woman shaped like a penis going through a hula hoop like that, evoking thoughts of sexual intercourse. Well, of course, I had no idea what sexual intercourse was, or that such a thing even existed, or that people did anything remotely like that. I had no idea about that. So I don't know. My emotional brain just found it arousing and found it sexy to see these women in their swimsuits swimming through these hula hoops. All right, so now my emotional brain and all of these memory associations have kind of been activated by seeing this scene in the movie. So that night, I go home, go to sleep, and that night I have my first ever erotic dream. And what was the dream of? The dream was of my mother, from the waist up, naked, with roses where her nipples should be. So, breasts with roses for nipples. It was a beautiful, beautiful dream, and it was very sexy. And I woke up and remembered it. And that was my emotional brain creating a fantasy from all these past memories. My mom, naked from the waist up. I saw her in the bathtub that way. The flowers from the swimming pool in Cuernavaca. And then somehow that scene of the underwater scene swimming through the hula hoops was what got my emotional brain activated and had my sexual arousal circuits recognize these as sexy situations and put together this sexy dream, which when I dreamed it, I got feelings of sexual arousal and attraction. And it stayed with me as a special kind of dream, completely different from any kind of dream I'd ever had before. The emotional feeling that came with it was that feeling of sexual arousal. So, one more thing. The first time I ever took LSD was in June of 1966. I was 17. I had just graduated from high school. And I took LSD. And I had the kind of hallucinations that I have never had before or since. They weren't hallucinations that made me think something was happening that wasn't. I was in a recreation room. I was lying on the floor. The ceiling was a cream-colored tile with little speckles in it. And I was listening to music. And I was seeing outlines of fantasy figures that my brain was creating, and the outlines were made up of little translucent jewels that were flowing, forming these ever-changing outlines of different things. And one of the outlines that formed itself was the outline of a naked woman. Not anybody in particular, but just naked, and her breasts were naked, down to the waist, and just below the waist, then that was it. That was where the image ended. And I've wondered since why, because I had seen naked women from head to toe by that time. I knew what a woman looked like by that time in my life. I knew very well what a woman looked like completely naked from head to toe, because I'd seen my mother that way many times. And I'd seen a few photographs in magazines, perhaps. But in any case, in that LSD hallucination, the naked woman was naked only down to the waist. Why is that? I think it's because my emotional brain was going back. It was kind of regressing in age back to like 2 years old, 3 years old, I should say, 3.5 years old. And it was retrieving the earliest memory that I had of a naked woman in order to project that into this fantasy of jewels, the outline of this naked woman. And so it was using the image that I had available at that age, which only included the image of a woman from the waist up being naked, because I had seen my mom in the bathtub by that age. I think that's what was happening with that. But okay, to return now to an earlier stage, that first erotic dream I had was about 6 years old, 5 or 6 years old, somewhere around there. The next things that were going on was I had a crush on my first grade teacher, I guess when I was 7. You know, she was this beautiful brunette young woman. And I just was in love with her, I guess. And one day in class, accidentally, I called her mommy. And the whole class burst out laughing. And I felt humiliated and ashamed, you know. She didn't make any big deal of it herself. She thought it was amusing, but I felt socially embarrassed by that. The following year, second grade, I had a crush on a little girl in second grade. Wendy, maybe was her name, Wendy or Stephanie. I'm not sure, it was one of the two. I think I had a crush on 2 different young women, Wendy and Stephanie, at slightly different times. So I was developing my affectionate impulses in addition to my sexual arousal impulses. They're not identical. They sort of follow a parallel path in our emotional brain. And so feeling like I had a crush on someone, like I had a crush on my cousin Diane when I was 4 years old and she was 5, when we were on that cruise up to Alaska on board the ship. You know, I had a crush on her then, and then I had a crush on these 2 little girls in second grade probably. But then my father and his preaching partner decided they would conduct a series of preaching missions in New Zealand and Australia. And New Zealand was where I had my second chance to see what a girl's body looked like below the waist when I wanted to play doctor with the daughter of the woman who ran the boarding house that I was living in. But the mother came in and broke that up. So that was when I was about 8. So, but this is slightly before that. We're crossing the ocean on an ocean liner heading for New Zealand from Los Angeles. And so I'm 7 years old. I'm not quite 8 yet. And they announced, you know, the kids all would play each other. They'd play with each other, and they would have parties and festivities, you know, something to do every day to keep us occupied during the 2 weeks it took to get across the Pacific, I think, close to 2 weeks. So one day they announced they were going to have a fancy dress ball or a fancy dress party. And we would call it a costume party, but this was a British line, and so they called it fancy dress. And so when I found out what that was, it was that you could choose your own costume and go to the party and dress up, you know, however you wanted to dress up. I thought this was great, and fancy dress. Something about fancy dress sounded kind of sexy in and of itself. So not long after I heard about the party, and it was a few days away, I came up with an idea for my costume. You know, my emotional brain gave me the idea, put it into my imagination, and I visualized myself in that costume. And I said, yeah, that's the costume, all right. Okay, I can describe the costume fairly briefly. It was a belt. Yeah, So it would be a very brief costume. But my emotional brain, with its exhibitionistic impulses that I had demonstrated in the bathtub with Mommy, came out again and said, take this opportunity to walk around the party wearing nothing but a belt. Wow, that would be fun. So that was one of my first sexual fantasies, was being able to do that at the fancy dress party. And so I fantasized about that continuously, day and night, for about 3 days before the fancy dress party, at which point my mother dressed me in a cowboy suit, and that's what I wore. I don't know what it was exactly. I forget what the costume was, but anyway, she dressed me in it, and I never even brought up the idea of the belt. You know, my fantasy life has always been far better than my real life sexually, except for certain excellent occasions after I grew up. But certainly during my growing up years, I had a lot of sexual fantasies that never got fulfilled. But that just shows, shows that exhibitionism is one of the impulses that was built into my emotional brain. And I think that we've had a lot of sexual liberation movements. You know, we've had gay liberation movement, lesbian liberation movement, bisexual, all kinds of different movements have had their liberation movement, all kinds of different sexual proclivities and tendencies. But I think exhibitionism is completely unrepresented. I think we are in dire need of an exhibitionist liberation movement, particularly for men. I mean, women are allowed to be as exhibitionistic as they want these days. They have opportunities galore to be very exhibitionistic, but mostly on the internet. But they can wear very sexy clothes as they go around, and everybody just thinks that's really hot. They doesn't look bad on them, or put them down. But guys, we never have a chance to show off our penises, you know. I guess that's why, bike shorts were popular, some time ago, and still are, I suppose. And they would be one of the few forms of dress that men could wear that would show off their penises without, while still looking athletic, so manly, in other words. Generally, showing our penis off is not considered something manly. And it should become part of a man's sexuality, just as much as a woman showing her body is part of her sexuality. But we don't have that many opportunities. But that's why I ended up, you see, at the Nude Beach. Becoming a regular at the Nude Beach in my town was because that was the one place where I could go and be an exhibitionist. And I think we need, we should have a penis pride movement and penis pride parades where guys can walk down the street naked with erections, in formation, perhaps, preferably with belly dancers or some other exotic women, leading them down the street in order to provide them with stimulation so that they could remain sexually aroused during the parade. We should no longer have to feel ashamed of our penises. We should end penis shame and replace it with penis pride. To show what a powerful, sexually arousing activity showing off my penis is to my emotional brain, and how the urge to show off my penis was built into it. Well, no, I'll get to that later. All right, I don't want to get ahead of the game. All right. Next step, after we get back from New Zealand and Australia, nothing much happened sexually while I was there. Got home, and a year or so later, I saw this magazine sitting in the nightstand next to my father's side of my parents' bed. I was in and out of their bedroom quite a lot. My brother and I used to go in there and play a game of submarine. They had twin beds, but if you put the beds apart a little bit and made the covers come down in the middle, you could create a kind of a submarine down in there. And my brother and I used to go in there and pretend that we were, undersea in submarines. So we were in and out of my parents' bedroom while they were not around, or my mom was downstairs and my dad was off somewhere. But I noticed this magazine sitting next to my dad's side of the bed. It was Life magazine, the most popular magazine in America at the time. And on the cover was this beautiful movie star, this dark-haired Italian movie star named Gina Lollobrigida. And it turned out she was playing the Queen of Sheba in a movie called Solomon and Sheba, which was late 1950s biblical movie, and the whole selling point of the movie was basically the sexiest costumes that they could put Gina Lollobrigida in and still get by the censor board, because in the 1950s, 1959, when that movie was released, it was before the ratings system that didn't come in until 1968. And that was the first time you had R-rated movies that had naked women in them, and X-rated movies that had maybe naked people of both sexes, but only a little bit. So this was like the 1959, this is almost 10 years before that, and this movie was, going to show Gina in the sexiest possible way, in all these different costumes that they could put the Queen of Sheba in. So I started looking at this layout, this photo layout in the middle of Life magazine, and Gina Lollobrigida was there. Oh, she was in the bathtub, taking a bath, and raising one leg out of the bath, and you could, see her down to there. So he knew she was naked in the bathtub. She was standing in her doorway in a white dress that was translucent. Basically, you could see right through it, and she wasn't wearing a bra, but you couldn't see any nipples, but you could see the bare flesh of her breasts under that, and then she had a belt around her middle that just covered her pubic area. And I didn't understand why you couldn't see her nipples, but anyway, she was standing there naked in this translucent gauzy vest. And then for the finale of the movie, she was in this belly dancing type costume, where the brassiere of it sort of had these hands that kind of curled around her breast and were holding her breast, and you could see between the fingers of the hand or the swirls of the bra, you could see her breast, behind that, and the only thing that was covered basically was her nipples, and so it looked like she was topless while she was doing this belly dancing costume for the great fertility ceremony at the end of the movie, and the lower half of her lower part, came down in a V, and then right over her pubic area there was a big sort of globe, circular thing, a belt, a disc of some sort, and then from that was hanging down, a train of stuff, and there was a translucent skirt around the rest of her legs and so forth. But she seemed to be about as close to being naked as it was possible to be, and not quite be naked. And so I was really turned on by that photo layout in Life magazine. And that was when I started to get my first erections. I found that after I was looking at the magazine, I'd be thinking about Gina Lollobrigida, and I would feel this swelling of my penis, and I was getting an erection. I had no idea what was going on. Because, all right, I'm 10 years old. I have no idea what sex is. I've never heard anybody talk about sex. In the Christian circles we moved in, nobody mentioned sex, and certainly not in front of children. So I had zero information about sex. No one had told me sex was bad. That's the good thing about being completely sexually ignorant, is that I didn't have any feelings, any guilt feelings about sex whatsoever, because I didn't know what sex was. And I knew it was really fun looking at Gina Lollobrigida practically naked in these pictures, and that my penis would get hard as a result of doing that, and that it would happen even when I wasn't looking at the pictures. I would think about Gina Lollobrigida either in that translucent dress, or in that bathtub, or in her fertility dance costume. And all I would have to do would be to bring that mental image into my head, into my consciousness, and my emotional brain would respond to it. The sexiness recognition centers in my emotional brain would respond to that mental image with sexual arousal. I didn't know what was happening, but what it was doing was it was sending nerve impulses down to my penis, opening up the blood vessels that let blood flow into the penis, and causing the penis to swell up with the blood flow into the penis. And that was because, and at the same time, my emotional brain was giving me the conscious feeling of being sexually turned on. And although I couldn't identify it as being sexually turned on. All I knew was this kind of a glow of really enjoyable emotion that had a very specific flavor to it. And it was the same flavor as when I was watching those women swim through the hula hoops, when I was watching my mom in the pool with the flowers, and when I was sitting in the bathtub with her, and when I was imagining walking around the fancy dress ball wearing nothing but a belt. In all of those situations, my emotional brain created the same flavor of enjoyable emotional arousal in consciousness. Sexual euphoria, sexual arousal euphoria. And that's certainly what was happening when I thought about the pictures of Gina Lollobrigida. Only now, I was definitely getting an erection, and it was actually, it was frightening me a little bit. I didn't know what was going on, but it felt good, so I wasn't too worried about it, but I thought, something's happening here, and I don't know what it is. So then, I'm having lunch. I'm 10 years old, having lunch in our kitchen. My mom's there. She's feeding my brother and me. He's like 6 years old. He's on the other side of the table. And I'm sitting here eating my sandwich, and my mom is sitting next to me. And I start thinking about Gina Lollobrigida. And my penis starts to swell up. And I can't make it stop because I'm thinking about Gina Lollobrigida. And I'm wearing jeans. I'm wearing blue jeans. That's all I used to wear when I was a kid. Well, denim, the material that blue jeans are made out of, denim is a fairly stiff material. It's made to be that way so that it'll protect you if you happen to be a cowboy riding through some cactus. The denim is supposed to protect you from anything like that. But it also means that when you're sitting, the material gets crinkled and folded like this. And you get folds, particularly right in on both sides of your thighs. And those folds are very stiff because they're made out of this stiff, tough denim. And, they're going in and out like the creases. So I started thinking about Gina Lollobrigida. And my penis is down alongside my right thigh. And it starts to expand downward along in that direction alongside my right thigh. But it's not just expanding, lengthwise. It's also expanding in girth. and becoming bigger that way too. And as it did so, the folds of the jeans, the denim, the creases in the jeans were digging into my penis. It was like the irresistible force, my penis, is meeting the unmovable object, the crease in my denim. And, you know, this is becoming sort of painful to me. And so I start squirming and pulling at my pants in order to try and somehow liberate my penis from this uncomfortably confining situation, which I can't prevent from happening because my emotional brain is still turned on by Gina Lollobrigida. So I'm fooling around with my pants like this, and my mother notices me. And she immediately leaps to the wrong conclusion about what is happening. When I was a baby, I had very dry skin. And the skin would be all red, and I would scratch it because it was itchy, because it was so dry. So my mom would have to rub Aquaphor, a sort of Vaseline-like substance, a soothing ointment, onto the places that were dry that I'd been scratching. And so when she saw me sitting there at the lunch table, squirming like that, trying to adjust my Levi's and get more comfortable, she assumed immediately that my dry skin condition was back, and she was going to have to, you know, put Aquaphor on it again. So she wanted to investigate, because as a mother, it was her job to take care of anything that was wrong with me. That was, she took care of everything that was going on with me. And so she said, "Stand up." She made me, and I, no, it's all right, no, stand up. So she had me stand beside the kitchen table. She undid my belt. She undid the snap on the top of the Levi's. She pulled down the zipper. She pulled the Levi's out, and I think she pulled my jockey shorts at the same time. She just grabbed hold of both of them and pulled them straight down. Well, that certainly had the effect of liberating my penis from its uncomfortable situation. It was liberated and jumped right out at her. So this is an example of one of my favorite sayings, which is true in so many instances in life. It's happened over and over again to be true. The future always turns out differently than we expect it to. And that was, my mother discovered right then, that was a moment for her when the future turned out quite differently than she had expected it to. She was looking for dry skin, but instead she got an erect penis. And so she just stared at my penis, and my penis stared back. It wasn't shy. And she didn't say anything. And so there was this sort of awkward silence. And I said, well, I figured this was a chance for me to find out what the hell was going on. "Mommy, what is it?" And she looked at it, and she said, "Oh, that's just something that happens to boys when they start turning into men. It's nothing bad at all. It's fine." And she pulled up my jockey shorts, pulled up my Levi's, zipped them back up, snapped them up, did the belt up again, had me sit down and finish lunch. I guess by that time, my erection had sort of gone away. So this was a little different from the time that I showed her my penis in the bathtub, because in this case, I wasn't deliberately showing it to her. She was insisting on looking at it, and she just got more than she bargained for. And at least she didn't say, "Oh, you know, that's a terrible thing." She didn't make me feel bad about it. She didn't shame me for having an erect penis. She told me that was a natural thing. So that was good. You see, she was as sex positive as she could be given the social conditions of the time. So from about 10 years old onward, she knew that I had reached puberty. And it was about a year and a half later that I actually had my first orgasm. And that's what I will talk to you about next time.